Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
We're living in prophetic times, the fulfillment of Bible prophecy happening, it seems, right in front of our eyes. Welcome to A View from the Bunker, whether you're listening at VFTB.net, Spreaker.com, or wherever fine podcasts are sold, or if you're watching the YouTube channel, YouTube.com/Derek Gilbert. You'll recognize our guest here, as there's no hiding the trademark goatee now. It's become sort of a trademark for him. He's the author of a number of books on Bible prophecy, the Psalm 83,
Missing Prophecy
Revealed, and the Now Prophecies more recently.
Now Prophecies, Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Revealing the Ancient Prophecy of Elam. We've got Revelation Road, Hope Beyond the Horizon.
Okay.
That was an earlier book, and it had stumbled me there. And then the sequel to that is just come out as Apocalypse Road, Revelation for the Final Generation.
Okay. Well, at least you don't have the handicap of having Tom Horn writing your subtitles, which are as long as the entire first chapter of some books.
Yeah.
But anyway, please welcome Bill Salus back to the program. Bill, it's
Derek, thanks
doing
a
this
lot.
face-to-face for the first time. We've done some via Skype video, but I think this is our first one face-to-face, at least not for a DVD somewhere from a prophecy conference.
Right, yeah.
But you have been writing about a number of things that have just really shed new light on prophecies, finding things in Psalm 83, with which seems to fit very well with the timeline of Ezekiel 38-39, and if we get some time, we really want to talk with you in some more depth about that. But you also had a really interesting, I guess let's talk about this, because I had the opportunity to talk to Joel Richardson recently about the very cordial debate that you had. And by the way, kudos for doing it in a way that I think sets an example for the way we should be when we're trying to sharpen one another, iron sharpening iron. A discussion of who represents Mystery Babylon, who Mystery Babylon represents, rather, in Bible prophecy. Joel takes the position that it's Saudi Arabia, and you are looking for coming at this from a different perspective.
Yeah, he has put forward the idea that Mecca could be the great city of Revelation 17-18.
Yes.
There's generally 5 candidate cities. You've got New York City, Jerusalem, rebuilt Babylon, Iraq. Probably the more popular view that goes back from the time of the Church Fathers, the Protestant Reformers, and a lot of our contemporaries today, is Rome, the city being Rome. But he came forward with the concept of Mecca, which is in line with his teachings of a Muslim Antichrist, so they sort of go hand in hand. Joel and I are good brothers in the Lord. Actually, matter of fact, we've become closer as a result of the debate. That isn't normally the results of something like that. But we made a decision in this debate to make it a discussion/debate, educational, a lot of research we both brought to the table, to put the facts out there and let people make their own decision.
Right.
And certainly not to, because as we see things get more electric out here, as the stage is setting more, as the prophecies are starting to get ready to find their fulfillment, we're hoping, and we're starting to see this a little bit, an increased appetite for prophecy among Christians and new believers coming in, interested in what does the Bible say predictively about the days going on. The last thing we wanted to do, Joel and I being mature in the Lord, was to stumble any of these people and get into divisions and schisms and things like that, which, unfortunately there's just too much of that going on in the body right now.
Right, yeah. There are a lot of fights taking place over non-essentials. My view of prophecy is that while God has given us glimpses, he's not called Yahweh of hosts, Lord of armies, for nothing. He's a general. And so just as the apostles, who learned directly from Jesus, probably the greatest theological teacher in history, I would guess, they didn't understand the prophecies of his first coming. We're probably not going to understand the prophecies of his second coming any better than they did. And we will probably get the outlines, but I think the fine details are probably concealed for a reason, because as Paul wrote to the church at Corinth, the archons, the rulers of this age, didn't understand it, or they wouldn't have crucified him.
That's absolutely right. And this was kind of an exciting challenge for me, because the shows I've been on with you before, the Psalm 83 book, the Now Prophecies, dealing nuclear showdown in Iran. These are dealing mainly with Middle East-centered events, right?
Right.
And events that could happen at the present time. Now prophecies that could happen at the present time, lacking preconditions. We could wake up tomorrow, they could happen, that type of thing. And the stage is set for these things to start to happen, and there's almost a baker's dozen of them that I put forward in the Now Prophecies book. But this is a little different. This is what happens down the road when we get to that point where Satan is no longer restrained. You have supernatural deception being unleashed as signs and lying wonders. Satan puts forward his closing arguments on humanity, and regardless of Joel's position or my position, Joel and I both want to let people know, this is a bad thing that's coming down the road. When you look at the details of this harlot world religion in Revelation 17 that then morphs into the commercial Babylon of Revelation 18, you don't want anybody to go through that stuff. Now you're intertwining these judgments in Revelation, the seal judgments, and then ultimately the trumpet, and then the Antichrist is on the scene, the bowl judgments. And we're in the age of grace right now, and there is persecution going on in the body of Christ, especially in other countries, Iran and China now and India. But we're, Americans right now are in the age of grace. We're not going to necessarily escape persecution. Things could happen coming our way. There's so many turbulent things going on. It's interesting. I was just thinking about this the other day, and you're following this being a host now on Skywatch, of course. It used to be that every 10 days there was some kind of a headline that seemed like it had prophetic implications, but now it's almost every 10 minutes. Derek. It's hard to almost keep up on this stuff.
Right.
But the main thing we try to do, here's actually the DVD that you're talking about. It's called Mystery Babylon, the Identity of Mystery Babylon, Mecca or Rome. And it's a 3-hour debate, discussion, and we each put good arguments forward and rebuttals and things like that. But we thought that this was something people should know right now, because when it happens, and I personally am a preacher of rapture believer. Joe, I'm not sure Joel is, and I'm certainly not trying to say you all have to believe in what I'm saying there, but I believe that we could be out here at any given time, and when that happens, the restraint is removed, and Satan's going to come forward with some powerful closing arguments, signs and lying wonders. We don't even know what that's going to mean. We've got hints and things like that. I know you're teaching some things that are very interesting, dealing with the artificial intelligence and things that are forthcoming. But yeah, just trying to let people know, no matter what city you think it is, do your homework and make sure that you don't get stuck living in that time, especially if you have an opportunity to be raptured prior.
Right. So what are some of the characteristics of the woman in scarlet, the Mystery Babylon, and why do you feel that Rome is the most likely candidate to fulfill that role?
Okay, yeah. Well, Mystery Babylon, it says mystery, and it's a mystery.
Yes.
Okay, Mystery Babylon. The mother of Mystery Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. She sits on many waters, we're told. That John gets a vision. Angel shows him, one of the angels with the 7 bowls, gives him a vision, and he sees this woman sitting on many waters, sitting on a scarlet beast. That would be the Antichrist. So we actually see a symbiotic relationship. The Antichrist is playing a little bit subservient role, second fiddle, to prop up this global religion. It says that the inhabitants of the earth are drunk with the wine of her fornication. Kings of the earth are committing fornication with her. Now that's related to spiritual idolatry. So it's a global religion. We find out in the prophecy that the many waters represent tribes, tongues, peoples, and nations. Global religion comes on the scene in the end times. Antichrist is in cahoots with it, propping it up. It says in Revelation 17:7, we're in the Revelation 17 is what we're talking about here, that the harlot, the beast actually carries the harlot to her heights, right? So it's interesting. And then they talk in Revelation 17 about some of the characteristics of the beast itself, but also, since it's a mystery, by definition, a mystery was something that was concealed in the Old Testament, but revealed in the New Testament. So the angel comes along and gives us the revelation of what this mystery is in Revelation 17:7 through Revelation 17:18, and those are intertwined verses with a little bit about the beast, but a little bit about the identity of the harlot. Revelation 17:9 says the harlot sits on 7 hills, and that can be mountains or hills. And so that was, of course, what Rome was, the city that sat on 7 hills. Matter of fact, at that time, John wrote some of the Roman coinage had the goddess Roma minted on the coin, lounging on 7 hills. Then we find out in Revelation 17:15 the fact it's global. It sits on tribes, tongues, nations, many waters. And then the real telling verse in Revelation 17:18, it says the angel says to John, the city which you saw, so verse 1, he took me and I saw this woman sitting on many waters. The one which you saw is a great city, is what it says. So what he says is what you saw, past tense. Yeah, John saw that woman sitting on the waters. Turns out to be a great city. Then the angel goes, it is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth, into the present tense, which now John is thinking, well, okay, that is Rome. That's what he would think. It didn't say the city which you saw will be the great city that reigns. It says it is right now. So I look at that as the present tense. So that's how. That's
Rome basically dominated the known world of John at the time that he was writing the Revelation.
Oh, that's right, and it was a known code word at that time because of the Roman persecution. 1 Peter 5:13. Peter actually uses. Calls Rome Babylon. It's clear that's what he was doing. It's interesting. Back at that time, the persecution was so bad. The Christian fish. That we see the emblem on. I think it's called the ichthys in its true language. Yeah, and what that was because you draw an arc this way, and then you draw an arc underneath it that way, and then the arcs cross, and you have the tail, and now you get the resemblance of a fish, the symbol of a fish. And the legend has it that because of the persecution, when someone was trying to communicate one person to another to see if they were on the same page, if they were Christians, or for whatever the reason may be, they would somehow maybe etch something in the sand with their foot one arc, and if the other guy came along underneath and had an arc that overreached it, had the fish symbol, they knew. Right. That's how bad it was back then.
There may be a day coming like that again. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and then Joel will put forward arguments with Islam. He'll say that there's 1.8 billion Muslims, the most dominant religion. When you add up the Catholic Church, about 1.2 billion, and I think other evangelicals and Protestants, about 900 million. So if you add it all together, it's overreaching. But I'm advocating that primarily this is centered in Rome with the Vatican, the Catholic Church, that sort of thing. And he says that that's the overreaching. Since it's a global religion, that would be the natural thing. It would be Islam. So he puts forward that kind of argument. The DVD is very fascinating, and of course I counter with arguments on why I don't think Islam will be the same at that time with the Psalm 83 war, which is predominantly Muslim, and then Ezekiel 38. But then Joel will say, which is also a Muslim war, I think those happen before the harlot world religion comes on the scene. But Joel would say, well, Ezekiel 38 actually happens in the tribulation period, when the harlot's around, right? So I think your viewers would be fascinated to, and the DVD is available on my website, prophecydepot.com, and on Amazon.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, and there are so many layers to it that are just incredible. Something occurred to me the other day, because as you know, I've been doing a lot of research into the cosmology, the religions of the ancient nations, the nations around ancient Israel, and the Amorites were a key people who are more important, I think, than we have given them credit for. We tend to use the word Babylonian and Canaanite, where in fact those were just different groups of Amorites, Eastern Amorites, Western Amorites. They were all Amorites. So I think Babylon may have more to do with the Amorites, and I'll explore that in my next book. But
well, I just want to interrupt you real quickly on dealing with the Amorites. If I'm not mistaken, in Genesis chapter 15, God tells Abraham He's going to give them all this land, from the river Egypt to the river Euphrates.
Yes.
And he says your people are going to go into captivity for 400 years. And
right.
we know that played out with the Egyptian captivity.
The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete.
And that's what he said. He said 400 years to figure out the iniquity of the Amorites. That had to be something pretty powerful.
That's what led me down this line of research, was that verse. What was it about these people that were so bizarre? But even just in little things, like, for example, why did Jesus ride a donkey colt, into Jerusalem? Rabbi Zev Porat was talking about this yesterday. Why did he ride the colt of a donkey into Jerusalem? Well, the Amorites, back in Abraham's day, the horse was something that pulled a chariot into war. But there is a surviving text from an Amorite king named Zimri Lim, who was a contemporary of Hammurabi and probably of Isaac and Jacob, who lived in the area along the Euphrates River that was the home turf for the Islamic State until recently, by the way. Chief god there was Dagon. And it was a court official telling Zimri Lim, "My lord should honor his kingship by riding a donkey. He should not ride a horse and thus dishonor it." For some reason, the donkey was a sacred animal to the Amorites. It was a sacrifice, and that was what the king rode, not a horse. It was the donkey. So when Jesus rode the donkey into Jerusalem, it was a message maybe not to the people of the other nations. The Romans might not have gotten it, but certainly the people who lived in that area and had been where the culture of the Amorites still existed even into the apostolic age. They knew what was happening when he rode the donkey into Jerusalem. Here comes the king.
Yeah. You notice my jaw's dropping, Derek? I mean, I can't believe how intellectual you've gotten with all this research and understanding. I remember when you were in the barbershop quartet and just doing basic interviews. And one of the things that we try to do with the DVD is to give the intellectual sides and the research, but we also try to lay it out in some basic layman stuff too, because we want everyone to understand these prophecies as well.
Well, one of the things that I thought that made sense in the argument in favor of Islam and they say the House of Saud, the Saudis, being the home of Babylon, is was it Revelation 19 where or is it 18 where fallen is Babylon the Great, and the merchants and the sea captains and everybody's wailing and bemoaning the loss of Babylon because of the trade and all the wealth that they have made through Babylon the Great. Certainly the wealth of the Saudis, oil, petroleum, has become the coin of the realm, and their trade, which is often carried across the ocean in big tankers, kind of fits the imagery that we see in John, but not only John, but in Ezekiel, back in verse 20 or chapter 27, where he's prophecy against the king of Tyre. And by the way, the Phoenicians were just descendants of the Amorites. So how would Rome fit that description?
Yeah, well, and he did bring up that argument in the debate.
That's a big part of his book, and
it is. Yeah, he's got 4 or 5, decent arguments. I felt that I went at him pretty good on all 4 or 5 of them. First of all, he and I both agreed that what we're talking about is a future tense, a future scenario.
So it may be something that hasn't developed yet.
We can't really look at presently at what the commercial systems look like right now. And first of all, Revelation 17 and Revelation 18, I pointed out in the debate, Revelation 17 is dealing with religious Babylon. Revelation 18 is dealing with commercial Babylon.
Okay.
Revelation 17, you have this harlot world religion, which he would say is Islam centered in Mecca, that overstands its usefulness, and 10 kings come and desolate it. They're in alignment with the Antichrist. This is Revelation 17:16. But then I point out, well, then we have to turn our attention, because it says then the 10 kings give their power and authority to the beast, and now he has his time for his kingdom. Well, his kingdom actually is in Revelation 13, where we find out no one will buy or sell unless they take a mark in the right hand of their forehead. That becomes commercial Babylon. The destruction of Revelation 18 is different than the 10 kings desolating the harlot in Revelation 17:16, because that's God doing that, and it says in 1 hour you are thrown down to be found no more. And you get into at that point the whole Antichrist system is collapsing now, because no one can buy or sell, and it doesn't matter whether you have a mark on your right hand or upon your forehead or that sort of thing. But also Saudi Arabia at this point, I said, Joel and I both agreed, look, if Saudi Arabia was destroyed today, the world economic systems would not collapse. If the Vatican was destroyed today, the world economic systems would not collapse. And we're talking about a future scenario when the sealed judgments are probably happening, there's famines and pestilences, there's been wars, a global order has to come in and kind of harness that, try to restore some sort of normalcy. I believe that could be the harlot world religion. So we look at the present versus the future. Saudi Arabia presently is, they're trying to find different ways, as are so the UAE, the Gulf Cooperative Council states, to bring in revenues into their country. The oil, the petrodollar is threatened, and sort of things like that. So what we see economically with Saudi Arabia right now, they're going through all kinds of changes with this new Prince bin Salman.
Yeah.
He's been throwing people in jail. He's, this whole thing. So you just can't put your finger on the pulse of what will be in the future, be it 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. We don't know exactly when the harlot's going to be on the scene. And say that because what we see right now is what we're going to thus have at that point. So we have to look at, in my estimation, other details to see what seems to make most sense. Now, one of the arguments I put forward, and I asked Joel, and this is a bit of a red flag for me, I said, Joel, listen, I can cite church fathers, Iranian, Tertullian, and I listed a bunch of them, reformers, John Calvin, John Knox, John Tyndale, contemporaries, Tim LaHaye, Vernon McGee, Dwight Pentecost, Dr. Reagan, Ed Hinson, a whole list of people that subscribe to Rome. It's throughout time. It's always been the popular view. Can you tell me anyone besides you and Walid Shubat who thinks it's Mecca? Is there anybody in history, any church fathers? And he doesn't have anybody. And that doesn't mean it can't be Mecca. In Daniel 12:4 tells us there'll be a time when knowledge will increase, people will travel to and fro. But it was a bit of a red flag for me because he's very good in his Islamic Antichrist book, bestseller, New York Times bestseller, in citing people who found an Islamic Antichrist, some of the old commentaries and things like that. But he couldn't find anybody, and I'm still kind of waiting to hear, because that would add a little, in my estimation, help him a little bit with more credibility.
Sure. Let's turn a little bit to events in the news. You mentioned Mohammed bin Salman, and certainly he's shaking up the geopolitics of the region. But back in December, and this was just reported recently after it was translated, President Erdogan of Turkey announced in front of the 57 member nations of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that they should put together a joint Islamic army to confront Israel. Now, as we're coming up in May on the 70th anniversary of Israel's independence, how do you process that as a scholar, student of Bible prophecy? What role does Turkey play? Is this something that we should pay close attention to?
Well, I look predominantly as what scriptures do we have, prophetically speaking, where Turkey's involved. And Joel and I would both agree they're in a prophecy called Ezekiel 38 and 39, Gog and Magog invasion. I actually think Russia spearheads that. Joel believes Turkey spearheads that. Undoubtedly, these Shiites in Iran and these Sunnis in Turkey and in Saudi Arabia, they're wanting to reestablish a caliphate that was destroyed in 1970, 1920 by the Ottoman Empire when it was destroyed in World War I. Iran's trying to do it as they spread their noose of terror, as Benjamin Netanyahu calls it, through the Middle East to have a Shiite caliphate. And then Erdogan's coming up with a central figure now trying to establish the Sunni caliphate like that. We know that Iran and Turkey come together in Ezekiel 38 and 39 to invade Israel. Of course, and those are predominantly all Muslim countries. Now, not all the 57 nations you were talking about per se. Actually, I believe Psalm 83 countries will be in their own independent prophecy prior to that.
Right.
And that would build those countries sharing common borders with Israel. The Jordan and Lebanon and probably Syria and Iraq, the Palestinians, Hezbollah, Hamas, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. They're not in Ezekiel 38, so they're not mentioned. And Ezekiel's pretty specific about who he mentions. So I think Turkey's definitely something you need to watch, where the relationships are building with Iran, with Russia. Now they're Sunni and Iran's Shiite, so so that bridge has got to be crossed. The way it seems to get crossed is, the common denominator amongst Sunnis and Shiites is they just don't like Israel. That would draw them together. Certain circumstances, you could see how they would come cohesively together. And that prophecy is dealing with this coalition of 9 members coming into Israel to invade them for great plunder and booty. Something is an Israel, I believe, that doesn't exist quite yet, that dwells securely without walls, bars, nor gates. These are details about that Israel when this invasion happens. Something about that Israel changes, and I believe that after they can dwell securely after they deal with the Arabs around them, and they will be wealthy. They'll probably expand territorially. The scriptures I point out in my Psalm 83 book, and that at that point you've got an Israel that is dwelling securely, that's probably quite wealthy. Wealthy because of not only inherent resources, they're discovering natural gas, oil.
Right, the Leviathan field in the Mediterranean. You've got that oil strike possibly in the Golan Heights.
That's right, and you've got and they could have spoils of war also, taking over territory. But also you could have an influx of quite a few Jews coming back when they feel it's safe to do so, and they've got a lot of themselves quite a bit of money they could bring in as well.
Sure.
But at some point we know that there's a carrot dangling on the stick that these Ezekiel invaders want to come after, and that is predominantly a Muslim invasion. So, Now, Joel actually thinks that Ezekiel 38 begins in the first half of the tribulation. So the invasion actually takes place in the beginning of the tribulation. And then the Antichrist, who he believes is Gog, would go in and set up his throne in Jerusalem. And that would correspond with the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24:15. But he says the actual response where the Lord stops the invasion with an earthquake, flooding rains, fire, hailstone, and brimstone doesn't take place for at least 3.5 years later, when in Armageddon. He puts the defeat in Armageddon at the same battle.
Right.
And I said in the debate, I said, Joel, what the $50 million question is, it says in that day when the invasion happens, the Lord does an earthquake, flooding, rains. How do you define in that day? Do you think Israel's going to wait around with their 200 nuclear weapons and wait around for, you think God's going to wait in his anger for 3.5 years for, so boy, the arguments he and I kept throwing back at each other were pretty astounding in love, and it was a very good debate.
Well, and the fact that we're 2,000 years on, from Ezekiel, we're 2,600 years almost after he wrote. He was in the 580s or thereabouts. The fact that we're still not quite clear on exactly how this is all going to shake out, again, I think speaks to God's wisdom as a military commander, concealing it from the principalities and powers who are our true enemy in this supernatural war. I mean, if we could understand these clearly and perfectly and know exactly what was going to happen, certainly the enemy would be able to fabricate a really, really convincing deception, which is already going to be so convincing that even the elect would be fooled if that were possible.
Right.
So
but the only thing that your viewers would find my perspectives in the debate, and generally how I teach, is I of course I've deviated a little bit. I've Psalm 83, not a lot of people had looked into that, and Jeremiah 49, not a lot of people had looked into that. But when it comes to like Ezekiel 38, I think there's been sufficiently good commentaries from a lot of our peers that explain that prophecy pretty well. Sometimes the timing gets a little confusing. To posit that it's a phased invasion where it happens in the first half but ends in Armageddon, there's very few people who've come up with that.
I would agree with you on that one. I think that's something that's going to happen a little more quickly together. But and I certainly, just to be clear, I don't want to convey the sense that we shouldn't try to study prophecy because we cannot possibly understand it. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that whatever views we come to through careful study and prayer for wisdom, we should be prepared to hold somewhat lightly, because somebody more intelligent may come along with a better understanding, and because it's not ultimately going to be completely revealed until God decides it's time.
Right. And 2 Peter 1:20, I point this out in the beginning of the debate, says, no prophecy is subject to private interpretation. There's a saying that if you put two Jews in a room, you get three different opinions. If you put, Jonathan Kahn told me this one time, we were together on a platform, and he said, if you put two prophecy guys together, you get five different opinions.
Right.
But there is no, God knows the end from the beginning. We're told that in Isaiah 46, 9 through 10. That's how he authenticates his sovereignty. I am God, there is none like me. I am God, I know of no other, declaring the end from the beginning. And he knows exactly how it's going to play out. And he gives us details of the prophecy. The generation that lives during the prophecy will actually know all those details, and they'll know exactly that okay, it was Turkey, or it was Russia, or it was Mecca, or whatever. So we're doing the best we can to put the information out forward to people, but they have to do their own homework. They've got to read the commentaries, and they've got to be a Berean. Acts 17:11 says that the Bereans were more noble than those in Thessalonica because they heard these things daily, but they searched the scriptures to see if they be so. And what was the proverb that it is the glory of a king to search out a matter? So this is it's a glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search out that matter. Right.
Yeah. So you want to be like a king? Do a little homework, do a little digging. Bill, where do people get a copy of that DVD? Because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's at my website, prophecydepot.com, Prophecy Depot like HomeDepot.com, or at Amazon. If you just type in Mystery Babylon, Bill Salus, it'll show up.
Hold up the video again so people get a look at the cover again. Fascinating discussion with two really, really intelligent guys. Really enjoy talking to Joel and Bill because I always learn something every time we do. And prophecydepot.com to get a copy of that. And again, to get an example of how brothers in Christ can actually discuss a matter from opposing points of view and do so with gentleness and respect, which is, after all, our biblical command. So,
absolutely, yeah. And these things are not salvation issues. These are just educational issues that we're trying to prepare the body with and equip them with information. So,
amen.
But Joel's definitely, some of the shows we've been on, I'm just impressed how he delivers the gospel at the conclusion. So.
Yeah. Well, vice versa. Same to you, brother.
Thanks, Derek.
Always appreciate it, and we thank you for watching.
Check the show notes at VFTB.net or wherever you're listening to the podcast, if that's how you're accessing this, whether it's Spreaker, Stitcher, or iTunes, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Or if you're watching this on video, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert, you'll see the links in the notes below the video for Bill Salus's website, prophecydepot.com. Now, just to be perfectly honest, full disclosure, I do tend to lean toward Joel Richardson's theory that Mecca and Islam will be the mystery Babylon of the end days. Sharon, on the other hand, agrees with Bill. So, but as Bill pointed out, I think wisely, we don't have all the information yet, and we won't until we are in that day, assuming that the church is still here when that day finally arrives. So it's a theory that in my case is based on the information that we have available today, which is that Islam seems more likely, or because Saudi Arabia's influence on Islam, it seems like a more likely candidate for the powerful end times trading empire that, when it's finally destroyed, will cause the merchants and the kings of the world who were enriched by their fornication with her to weep and wail then with Rome. But again, before we get to the end, things could change a lot, so we don't have all the information at hand just yet. So anyway, always appreciate talking to folks like Bill and like Joel Richardson, and you can check out that video, that DVD, from either of their websites, either prophecydepot.com or joelstrumpet.com, to hear the 3-hour discussion between Joel and Bill, moderated by our friend Dr. Larry Spargimino, and we'll got more news about him coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Of course, we are still trying to figure out what exactly is the path ahead for the United States in Syria. Anytime things happen in that part of the world, there are, prophetic implications, perhaps. A week ago Friday was the United States, UK, and France launching a missile attack against Syria in response for the alleged chemical attack in the town of Douma, east of Damascus, on April 7th. There are questions about what exactly happened there. There are some organizations, some reporters that have gone to Douma and said they found no evidence that chemical weapons were used at all, that perhaps it was a false flag to cover up the withdrawal of rebel forces from Douma, getting out from under the thumb of Assad's loyal forces before they took over the city. Who knows? It's a war of information, and there's a danger, regardless of what point of view you hold, of allowing, filtering the news based on what information confirms the bias that you have. If you want to believe that everything in the mainstream media is a lie, then, okay, you're going to filter out information, but you're probably not going to be any closer to the truth than people who say that, who believe everything that they hear from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, New York Times, Washington Post, etc. Somewhere in between there is the truth, and we don't have boots on the ground to access exactly what that truth is. I did find it odd that a CNN reporter, a couple of days after the alleged attack, interviewed refugees who had fled the town of Douma, claimed to be survivors of the chemical attack, and sniffed the backpack of a girl to see if it had been exposed to a chemical weapon, a toxic substance like chlorine or sarin. Now, a viewer to Skywatch TV, and thank you for the information, reported that sarin does dissipate fairly quickly. So the fact that the CNN reporter was still able to, survived, is not necessarily evidence that nothing happened in Douma. I had raised that question during on Skywatch TV this past week, and somebody pointed out that, just because she lived doesn't necessarily mean nothing happened. There is other evidence, however, that the story that we've been told is perhaps not exactly what took place in Douma. So, again, it's a war of information, and only God knows, really, what's going on there. And as he says, vengeance is his, and he will repay those who are exploiting this and using this one way or another to exploit human beings, other innocent people who are just caught in the crossfire. So there's that. The Iranian drone that was shot down by Israel back in February, you may remember that story, was apparently armed and on an attack mission. This is news that was just released by the Israeli Defense Forces on Friday. This is a pretty big deal. And kind of, because it was released on Friday, kind of after the news cycle, just kind of skated by without much attention, or at least not as much as I thought it should have gotten. This was the drone that took off from the T4 airbase near the city of Homs on February 10th, shot down by an Apache helicopter, an IDF Apache helicopter. After that drone was shot down, F-16s from the Israeli Air Force launched an attack on the T4 airbase. One of those planes was shot down. The pilot and co-pilot ejected in Lower Galilee, got away with minor injuries. The first Israeli Air Force plane shot down since the 1982 war in Lebanon. So again, kind of a big deal. Things are heating up there. And yay, just in time for our trip to Israel is what it is. So things are happening there, and that's why we're talking about prophecy now. In fact, my next book is going to deal quite a bit with the Gog-Magog conflict and how Greek mythology actually overlaps with the Gog-Magog conflict, which in turn is one and the same with the Battle of Armageddon. The Gog-Magog war ends with Armageddon, and a lot of characters from Greek mythology will take part in that. That's the point of my next book. That's also why there's no PID radio this weekend. Sharon and I are both in the middle of editing because we're trying to get these next manuscripts done and turned over to the publisher and the printer before we go to Israel. We're going to be gone for about 3 weeks and don't want the that task kind of hanging over our heads as we're gone. So we apologize for no PID radio today, but we do, of course, have a new Gilbert House Fellowship. That's our weekly Bible study that you'll find at gilberthouse.org. In fact, we've got a mobile app for that, good for iOS and for Android devices. So iPad, iPod, Touch, iPhone, Android phones and tablets. You can download the app. It's free at the app stores, the Google Play Store, and our weekly Bible studies will come right to your smart device, and hopefully you'll find some benefit to it. We're in the book of Ezekiel right now. In fact, today did chapters 19 through 22. We're probably not going to get to Gog and Magog until, well, I know we're not going to get to Gog and Magog until after we get back from Israel, but that will make it even the more interesting because we will be referencing some of the geography that Ezekiel talks about in chapter 39 especially. When we get back, and then we will be able to talk about it having seen it with our own eyes. And that's going to be just an awesome thing. A lot on our calendar coming up for the rest of this year. After the trip, of course, to Israel and then Jordan, we will fly to Rome to take part in the Gen 6 the True Legends expedition to Rome and Sardinia. So we'll tour the Vatican, see the historic sites of Rome, and then over to the island of Sardinia, where the Phoenicians left some very interesting archaeological sites, which again relates to the book that I'm working on, because the Phoenicians, who were just the descendants of the Canaanites, who in turn were simply Amorites, had some very interesting, interesting is not the right word, let's say despicable, detestable religious practices that are linked to the book of Ezekiel. So again, this all fits together, and we'll be able to talk about this with firsthand knowledge, at least, having seen the sites with our own eyes when we return. So after we return from Rome and Sardinia at the end of May, then our next main event is coming up in August. That is Hear the Watchman, Long Island. The Hear the Watchman conferences going to the East Coast, August 9th through 12th. Henry Groover, Pastor Paul Begley, Pastor Carl Gallups, Rabbi Zev Porat, L.A. Marzulli, Dr. Michael Lake, and more. And as an added bonus, a day trip to Montauk. That's Camp Hero, the now closed Air Force Base that was the site of a number of projects that may or may not have taken place, but at least they inspired the conspiracy theories that inspired the Netflix series Stranger Things. So it should be a fun day, as well as educational, in addition to being edifying for the rest of the weekend, the fellowship and the information. For more information and to register, log on to hearthewatchmen.com. That's hearthewatchmen.com, again, August 9th through 12th on Long Island. And then in September, the True Legends Conference returns to Branson. That's the Transhumanism, the Hybrid Age Conference. Steve Quayle, Tom Horn, Sharon K. Gilbert, the keynote speakers, along with Timothy Alberino, Dr. Hugo DeGaris, David Knight of Infowars.com, and now Richard Dolan just added to the lineup. Richard Dolan, famed ufologist, sees the interconnectedness between the ufology movement, the UFO community, and the transhumanist movement. So he will be one of the speakers as well. It's about half sold out already, so don't wait. If it sounds like it's of interest to you, and it should be, because transhumanism is one of the key topics, key issues that the church really needs to contend with, and most in the church don't even know what the word means. Transhumanism and the Hybrid Age, September 14th through the 16th in Branson. Get yourself educated, and again, take advantage of the fellowship. For information and registration, gen6.com. That's GENSIX.com. And then in October, the East Coast Prophecy Conference, put on by our friends at Southwest Radio Church. That's Dr. Larry Spargimino and Dr. Bob Glaze. October 18th through the 20th at the Wyndham Gettysburg. That's Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Tom Horn, one of the featured speakers. I will be speaking. Sharon will be there, of course, as well. Joe Horn will be speaking. And Stephen Strang, the publisher of Charisma Magazine and the author of God and Donald Trump. We will be looking for you there and looking forward to the opportunity to see that the battlefield there. That's been on my bucket list. So definitely looking forward to that. Again, October 18th through the 20th, the East Coast Prophecy Conference in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and hope to see you there. The website for information and registration is swrc.com. That's swrc.com. Please give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, and by the way, I need to mention that we have now moved our podcasts. We're in the process of getting approved for being moved over to iHeartRadio as well. So we'll hopefully we can announce that here within the next week or so. But anyway, give us a review and a thumbs up wherever fine podcasts are sold. Give us a like on Facebook as well, facebook.com/viewfromthebunker. And remember, we're a production of Gilbert House and released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. The opening theme is by Kevin MacLeod. His website is incompetech.com. Our opening announcer, DC Good. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.